Hello everybody, and welcome back to stage 4 of the We Are Developers World Congress 2024. Before we continue, I would just like to repeat, to ask questions through the Congress app provided by Swapcard, you need to go to the app, search for the event, click on live interactions, and then there is a tab for questions. Click that, and then you can ask the question. The next talk will be held by Markus Walker. Did you ever feel that your work was measured by unfair, counterproductive, or otherwise bad metrics? In the next talk, we will have a look into some developer productivity metrics to evaluate their general validity, usability in different scenarios, as well as their impact on developer happiness. At the end, we might be finally able to answer the question, can 9 women give birth to a child in 1 month? Please, welcome Markus Walker to the stage.
So, yeah, welcome everybody. I hope everybody can hear me. I was told to speak loud. No complaints. All right, then let's get going. Welcome to Do You Know How Fast You Are Developing? First of all, my name is Markus Walker. I am a cloud architect at PRODYNA. And yeah, what does PRODYNA do? We are IT consultancy. We have roughly 400 employees in 6 locations. Work for customers in multiple industries, multiple sizes, and support the whole application lifecycle from requirements engineering to development, testing, design, support, maintenance, everything. So if you need a helping hand, you can find us in the other hall right next to stage 11. But let's get going. Why and how to measure developer productivity? As you have already heard, I will talk a little bit about what metrics there are, how to use them, why not to use them, finding alternatives, and all the like. But first start with a little bit of history. In the ancient times, software projects usually were done in a waterfall manner. So you have your steps from requirement to operations, usually long times of development, 2 years, 5 years, changing requirements, changing staff. So after long and hard work, the day of release finally arrives and you are here. Or maybe you are here. Nobody really knows why. The latest revision is somewhere hidden in the archives and nobody has any idea what's going on because there was no measurement across the development. So we then made some improvements, for example, with the Scrum framework as one example of the Agile revolution. And as you can see, or as you probably know, Scrum is faster feedback cycles. So after 2 weeks or 4 weeks, you usually have an increment, which is already a better idea to have short cycles because you can inspect and adapt way faster. But again, Scrum also has some problems. What can already be seen, you have an increment, and at the end, nobody knows really what to do with your increment. But on the other hand, Scrum gave us cool tools to measure some kind of productivity. For example, the beloved burn-down chart. But as every chart, there are wrong ways to do it, let's say it like that. We see from time to time, especially customers being new in Scrum and Agile, they do their estimations based on real time and not abstract measurements. What then happens with this burn-down chart is that you have on both the X and the Y axis a time measurement. Therefore, the only thing you can read there is the current day. So not really helpful in checking how fast you are going. So we may need something else. Later on, the DevOps approach arose, which has a closed feedback cycle, and you can already see after the increment was delivered by Scrum, we also inspect the whole release and deployment part. We have operations, and we can take measurement at every step of the whole application lifecycle process. So we can measure the development, we can measure user interaction with our app, we can measure response times, and all the like. So what is the benefit of the DevOps approach? Well, if I can deploy faster, I can get my feedback way faster. With faster feedback, I get more data and better data. And with that, I can tackle or come up with better approaches to handling certain things. So then, to the actual topic, why should we measure at all? Well, first of all, without measuring, we would go blind and we would have no idea of what's going on. So, typical points of why we should measure is we want to identify problems. Problems seen by users, like slow response times, or problems with the schedule, like we have a release date, but we see early on that it's not possible to reach that. But also problems with our developers. For example, that the developer gets frustrated and works slower, or even terminates the contract, or something like that. So we want to be able to identify problems. This also leads to the possibility to gather improvements compared to our own past. So if you see, last year we had problems with our uptime of our application, but today we don't have any more. We need data for that. We need data continuously so we can make comparisons. And if there are ways to, or if there's a way to see improvements, there's also a way to identify downward trends. So we want to see early on if something is going in the wrong direction, to be able to prevent it, because what usually happens otherwise is that you try to fix problems when it's already way too late. So in general, you want to check that everything is on track, because at the end, going fast doesn't necessarily mean going in the right direction, so you have to check from time to time if everything is in place. So if we know that there are reasons why we should measure, there are also reasons why we should not measure. And there are mostly two big topics. The first thing is to compare something to other teams. Comparisons are usually quite hard, especially if you try to compare things which aren't comparable, and nearly everything is incomparable except my own past. So for example, you have two teams. Team A takes for pull request reviews usually half an hour. Team B needs 3 hours, so the project manager of Team B decides, hey, they're doing something better than we do, so we should adopt their approach and reduce our pull request review times. So Team B also only takes 30 minutes, but at the end, it turns out Team A never actually have done them correctly, so there was a problem in measuring the data, and by the comparison, we try to force certain behavior which is going in the wrong direction. The other thing why you should measure is any kind of incentivization. So what do I mean by this? There is a good quote by Charles Goodhart. When a measurement becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measurement. What does it mean? Everything you can measure which can be gamified by anyone will probably not be a good measurement anymore. So we have some examples. What we also regularly see for CTOs, for example, they get the task, hire 20 people. So the CTO goes along and hires 20 people. Most of you might know that it's really hard to find good developers, so hiring 20 people on the spot is nearly impossible, but still, just to track the metric, people will do things and just hire nearly everybody. So at the end, everybody loses, except the CTO who reaches his goal. Then another thing which might surprise some of you is what you also shouldn't measure is the number of bugs that are fixed. The reason for that is also quite easy. There was a company giving away 50 bucks in cash for tester and developer for each bug fixed. This leads to developers deploying code with intentional bugs in it, telling their test buddy that there is a bug, so the test buddy can report the bug, the developer can fix the bug, and both get 50 bucks. The whole thing was cancelled after 1 week, and nearly a 5-figure paid out. And the last thing, which also is, people usually want to measure because they think it's a good measurement, is lines of code. But it doesn't matter which perspective you take on that, it will always be a bad measurement. For example, if you incentivize having lots of lines of code, you get something like this. This logic just maps a character to the position in the alphabet. Of course, you can do all 52 cases and the task is done, but that's probably not the best approach. Then you could think, okay, if lots of code is bad, maybe less code is better. And then you get something like this. It's actually working. I have no idea why, but it's doing the exact same thing, but nobody's able to maintain that anymore. So my personal approach would be more something like that, not too long, not too short, doing the job. All right, now that we know why and why not to measure, the question comes what to measure or what kinds of metrics you want to measure. And the favorite answer of every IT consultant is, it depends. As an industry standard, we have the DORA metrics from the DevOps Research and Assessment, cool team of Google engineers. They are coming up with cool ideas. So what does the DORA metrics, what metrics are they using? They're using deployment frequency. How often are you able to deploy a change to any system, dev, prod, whatever. Then lead time for change is mostly interesting for project managers. How long does it take from I create a ticket and schedule it in my sprint until I can see the final result on production, or until the users can see it? Then change failure rate. How often does it happen that I make a deployment with a new version and something is just not working? Even either the deployment itself failed, or the server blew up afterwards, or anything like that. And at the end, if something bad happens, how long does it take to restore my system? As with all industry standards, it's a one-size solution, so usually one size fits none, and therefore the DORA metrics are a good start, but they are not applicable for every company. Just imagine working in finance, for example, where you need a lot of signatures before you are able to deploy something to prod. So it doesn't make any sense to measure your deployment frequency, because it will be weeks or months just based on the process behind or the law given there. Or the same thing with the change failure rate. If you are a core banking provider, your change failure rate should be 0, because if you have any problem in your deployment, it's going to be expensive. Or even worse, when you do something like aeronautics, a change failure rate which is different from 0 might look like this. And even if it's not that problematic, you still have a problem of getting the metrics together, because if you then have a problem on your server and not everything blows up, and you have 4 weeks of release cycles, then you need to find a way to fix the bugs otherwise, so that would usually involve fixing a bug in production. It's a lot of fun if you don't have to do it. So, coming back, as I said, DORA is a good start, and it's good metrics, but not holistic enough, and therefore the SPACE framework was created by people from GitHub, Microsoft, and Victoria University. They tried to take a holistic approach of measuring productivity by having 5 dimensions of data. So you can see they gather information based on satisfaction, so mostly service. How satisfied are you with your job, with your tools? Are you happy to come to work each and every day? Then they measure performance, so how fast are you able to deliver things? How fast are you able to fix bugs? How fast is your tooling? Are you waiting like half an hour for your unit test to run? That's measured in performance and can be, again, just plain metrics. Then activity is the plain activity of a developer, so how fast how fast and what types of activities is the developer doing, so how much time has he spent coding, how much time has he spent in communicating with other teams, debugging, bug fixing, waiting for deployments, and so on. Then communication is probably self-explanatory, like how often do people communicate, how is the quality of the communication, what different kinds of communication are offered. Also, for example, like documentation thing, which is a part of communication as well. And at the end, efficiency is more or less the DORA metrics then again. So how far or how effective are you working? How fast are you able to get from the idea to the deployment, or how fast from the idea to the user can actually work with that? And they came up with this framework because they realized productivity is not only developer activity. Productivity is more related or correlated to satisfaction, and productivity is also hard to quantify because there is no one metric to rule them all. So if we follow these baselines now to come up with our own metrics, we have to find first our metrics. So usually what you would do, you start with a goal, and you refine your goal with typical W questions to come up with a with a work item, and you have to make it transparent. So as an example, my goal could be the system should be reliable. Then asking the W questions. What are parts of my system? What does reliable means? Why am I even having this goal, and who am I, or for who am I working towards that goal? Specifically reliability. Do I want to be reliable in the sense that my data should always be correct? Do I need an uptime of 99.99%? Do I only need to be reliable Monday, Friday, 9 to 5? So depending on who your goal is affecting, the metrics change you need to apply there. Then once you have your goal, you should also make sure that the whole team agrees on this goal. And by team, I don't only mean the Scrum team, like the developers and the product owner, but also other stakeholders, like users, like management and so on. Because if you can be sure that everyone is aligning on the same goal, then everybody will also work towards that goal, and they will be, they won't try to trick the metrics, because it's their goal as well, and therefore they try to work hard there. Then, if I have my goal, you need to ask the questions like, does my goal impact happiness in any way? So if you have a goal like, we need to hire 20 new developers, you have to first check, are the developers also okay with having new developers? Are they having the capacity to onboard new developers? Or are they, would the satisfaction go down when you try to achieve your goal? Because at the end, if the developer is unhappy, he will be unproductive, and then you get nothing. Then if you have your goal, you try to find metrics to support that. So for example, the reliability, okay, I track uptime of my system, I track how many bugs the users will return and other things. And then you also need to identify interferences between metrics. So for example, if I want to deploy faster, I might see, okay, the longest part of my deployment cycle is actually the pull request review. So I could try to lower the amount it takes to resolve or to review pull requests, but on the other hand, I still have to make sure that my pull request itself is useful, that the quality of the PR is useful. So there you have some interaction between metrics where you increase the one, you lower the other, so at the end you have to find ways to align all goals you try to achieve. Then to give you some ideas, what could be some of those metrics that you might want to measure. First, we have some more or less technical things, or things that developers are mostly concerned with, because at the end, what does a developer do? A developer wants to develop stuff. They want to code things, they want to see their things come to life, and they don't want to spend time in meetings or fixing bugs or some of those issues. So you could, for example, as I already said, the pull request to make sure that you are delivering fast and high quality, but you could also measure how often are my developers disturbed each day by meetings, by waiting for their build tools, by other developers. Because if you see that your developer only has like focus time of 20 minutes at a time, it's not possible to get much done in this short amount of time, so you might try to reschedule events, for example, or try to give them some focus time. The same then also applies for waiting time, which is more like when I run my unit tests, I want them to be run fast in like seconds and not minutes, because after 5 to 10 minutes, you usually lose track of what you are currently doing. And to get back into track, it takes, again, 10 minutes. So if you are waiting for 5 minutes for your unit test, you actually already lost 15. And that's something to take into consideration, and which helps identify bottlenecks in the overall software development progress. Then on the other hand, those are more esoteric measurements, more or less, but also things that might frustrate developers, because the amount of tasks reopened because there was a bug ticket, or the task was not completed in a full manner, or things were just omitted, then tasks get reopened, and again, developers have to switch their current focus. Because if you go by Scrum, then everything is prioritized, therefore it means if a task gets reopened, the developer has to tackle that task. So we have again a context change, and therefore we are losing time there. And also it's quite frustrating for a developer to do the same thing over and over again. Then what at least I observed myself is that's also good to try to minimize the time it takes from a commit to a deployment to dev, because again, developers love to code, but they also like to see what they were doing on a real environment. So if you can achieve that the developer between making a change to the software and seeing that change in a real production, and I don't know, less than 5 minutes, then that's usually good for the happiness, and they are way more motivated to work towards their goals. Then, yeah, regarding the task we opened, you can also measure how many errors were reported, or how much downtime your system has, and all these things, because if the developer is doing a good job, but your infrastructure is unreliable and crashing all the time, and users are complaining, that's highly frustrating, and therefore you try to minimize these interruptions. And one thing the Google team actually found out is that's also good to have at least a rough overview of how much talking time each team member has in your meetings. Because Google tried to find the perfect team and analyzed millions of data points, and they found out that if everyone in the team has roughly the same amount of speaking time in meeting, that they usually tend to work better together, because everybody feels heard and everybody feels taken serious, and therefore, yeah, everything goes better, and I'm running out of time. Then, if we now know what we want to measure and why we measure, we need to find out how to measure. That's, yeah, more or less quite easy. First, again, you have to involve all your stakeholders, so like the people who are providing the data, people who are at the end getting the data, evaluating the data, the people measuring. Then you also want to define a scope, like in what context do I want to measure this kind of data, because as I said, comparisons to other teams doesn't make sense, and therefore a measurement of deployment frequency across the whole organization doesn't make any sense. You should define your scope as close to where you need it as possible. Then what you also should do is, when you are taking measurements, you should also beforehand define an expected outcome. You should already have an idea of what you expect the results to be and how to handle, what to do with that data, because otherwise you tend to preemptively suggest solutions which might not be the best. Then you also have to make sure to select the correct way of measurement. As I said a little earlier, there are some data points you can't measure quantitative, so not as raw numbers. For example, the satisfaction of your developers is usually qualitative, so you want to do surveys or interviews or something like that, where it's really hard to quickly evaluate the outcome. But sometimes that's necessary. Quantitative data, on the other hand, raw numbers, you can just crunch them and display them and everything is fine. Then, when you've taken your measurement, you should also make sure to repeat it regularly, because you want to see progress over time, and therefore you need to regularly repeat it. And at the end, you need to evaluate your findings. So what you should keep in mind when evaluating, that again comes back to the Scrum approach. We want to inspect and adapt. We want to have a look in our data, and we want to make informed decision based by it. So you have to make sure to display your findings correctly. And by that I mean, do I need a bar chart? Do I need a raw number? Do I just need a traffic light which quickly shows management, okay, everything is green, that's perfect. But for a developer, for example, who is capable of working with the raw data, the raw data usually finds a better way, especially if you want to find, again, interferences with other data. If you want to join your data, you have to make sure that at the end, the process of processing your numbers, you don't make any errors, because otherwise everything would have been in vain. Then you need to discuss the numbers and find out if they pose a problem. Again, the example with the pull request time. I mean, if you see the pull request is taking 3 hours, the first thing you should do is ask your developers, is that a problem? are those 3 hours because you are using 2.5 hours of focus time doing something else, and then when you find the time, you do the PR. So then it's only like, it would have taken only 30 minutes. Then that's a good sign because then you know your developers are focusing on the things they should actually do. So you need to find out if that's a problem, because there's nothing worse than taking action on problems that don't exist, because then you probably get a problem. Then, as I also said, find the influencing factors. So my metric is now bad, find out why. Why is it taking so long for the PRs? Or why aren't we able to deploy twice as often, or things like that. And in the end, you should discuss solutions and come up with a plan to tackle. And after you set your solution in action, you should remeasure again. So there we are already through more or less. And if you just want to take one thing away from this presentations is happy developers are productive developers. So yeah, keep the developers happy and everything is probably fine. And if you want to go more in depth, be sure that your metrics are useful and relevant. Be cautious when you compare things to one another. Make sure that the comparison is actually working. Be sure to involve everyone required there, all the stakeholders. And yeah, at the end, communication and transparency is key. Like with everything, especially in Scrum, you have to communicate openly. You have to make everything you find out transparent, because that's the only way you can be sure to find the perfect approach. And coming back to the question from the beginning, so I'd rather argue that instead of asking if 9 women can birth to a child in 1 month, I would rather ask, or I would say that it's more important that everyone is happy and healthy. Thank you very much. If you want to have a further look, I have some sources, and otherwise, you can find us in the other hall.
Thank you very much. And we do have some questions. So the first question is, how do you apply this measurement in a cross-team project where each team has its own culture, stakeholders, and ways of measuring productivity?
Yeah, that's actually hard. That's exactly the thing with the comparisons, because if the 2 teams are not directly related to one another, it's hard to have common metrics to apply for both. So at the end, I would probably rather go with that every team takes their measurement of productivity on their own. And yeah.
And then how do you work them together for the whole project? Or do you even need to do that?
It depends if you need to do that. I mean, if the 2 teams are applying to a common goal, then of course, then there are, on the other hand, measurements which apply for both teams, and then you can get those on the higher scope. But if they are more or less unrelated and only meeting at the boundaries of their systems, then there is no reason to compare them.
Yeah,
at least in my opinion.
If you're coming to a completely new team, what are the first metrics that you want to look at and measure, or how do you want to start thinking about this?
That's a good question. To be perfectly honest, I'm currently working mostly as a DevOps engineer, and therefore my personal choice of metrics is DORA, because those are also the ones I can implement, or I can impact the most with my daily doing. But on the other hand, it's, as I said, you need to come up as a team and find your goal, your purpose as a team. What do you want to achieve? And then the metrics more or less come naturally.
Thank you. I don't know if you will, but do you have any good ideas on how to measure product development process or value delivery?
That's really hard. That's actually really hard. I mean, that's I had it before in the slide. Counts a little bit to action. I mean, just because a developer is doing twice as many commits as the other doesn't mean it's doubly as valuable. So that's really on a base-by-base example. You have to really check what kind of impact is each developer doing and how effective in that. So that's.
And you said you mostly work DevOps,
yeah,
right?
Currently in my project.
Okay. So the last question is, what metrics would you recommend for legacy rewrites? And I think in your case, think more of like migrating a legacy project or spinning up something new from something old.
Based on my own experience of migrating legacy things, what what I like to measure was usually code coverage of unit tests. Because when you try to migrate an old system into the new one, you want to make sure that everything is behaving the same. And therefore, I usually would start there with unit tests and then test coverage. And then on the other hand, if I go a little further of the migration process, I would try to measure the size of old versus new system to have a rough idea of how much of the migration is already complete.
Yes, thank you.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Markus Walker. Thank you. We will continue the program here in 10 minutes. The next talk will be Intentional Code by David Whitney. So
Thanks.
see you here at 15:30. Bye.
Of course, we all have different opinions about things. But in the end of the meeting, when you go, it's still the same set of people you would want to go grab a beer with. Some of the smartest people who have you ever met. In the best optics company in the world, you are learning from them every single day.
To empower the people who solve problems and advance their careers with code, so you can create more extraordinary things faster. What are you waiting for? Join Red Hat Developer today and harness the full power of open source software with Red Hat technology.